Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Dan Clements Show, Christian Political Talk Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is August 31st, last day in August, folks, in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we are hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control and He does love you, and I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And I do have both chat rooms opened. I did not get a chance to put the title of the show over on the on Blog Talk Radio or over on my YouTube channel. So that'll be coming up. I did title it Putting Americans in Harm's Way. And no, it has nothing to do with war, folks. It really doesn't. So I'm just trying to finish up something here. Philippians 4:12 through 13. I thought I had this done earlier, and I did not. And I'm looking at the board, and I'm like, So, okay. I'm just looking at my my daily Bible verse, 12 through 13. Okay. 12 through 13. Okay. I got that all highlighted. All right, let's get into the show here, folks. The official drink of the Dan Clements Show is Rocky Mountain High Brands. That's what I'm drinking right now. I'm drinking the lemonade because it doesn't have any caffeine. It's very low in sugar. It's not artificially sweetened, but it's very low in natural sugar. And they have a whole line of products, from iced tea to different flavors of energy drinks to energy shots to hemp-infused protein bars, Eagle Spirit water. So they have the whole shebang, and I've made them the official drink of the Dan Clements Show, and one of the reasons why is I own stock in them, full disclosure. They're part of my retirement portfolio, as it were. So if you like the idea of having hemp-infused drinks, and it seems to help me in my fibromyalgia, and you know, that's my personal study on myself, as it were. So that only applies to me. It may not apply to you. I can't tell you the healing powers of it, but each 16-ounce can has 100 milligrams of hemp oil that's infused in them. So, like I said, it makes me feel better with my muscles and that. And if you're having a problem with that, it might help you too. I don't know. All right. Today's daily Bible verse comes from Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 through 13. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, a lot of people take verse 13 out of context there, what he's talking about, and Paul is telling the Philippians, no matter what situation in life that he finds himself in, that he can do all things through Christ, no matter what his own personal life circumstances are. And that's what we need to take away from that too, folks. Today's quote meal comes from Douglas Horton. Douglas Horton. Man worships because God lays his hand to the dust of our experience, and man miraculously becomes a living soul and knows it and wants to worship. And there has been said by philosophers that there is a hole in our being that only God can fill. Now, not all philosophers think that, but being a Christian, I truly believe that there's a hole in our being that only God can fill. And folks try to fill that hole with so many other things, it's just not even funny. And so, you know, just think about it. Just think about that. Man worships because God lays his hand to the dust of our experience, and man miraculously becomes a living soul and knows it and wants to worship. You know, there's, and I just point to some of these societies that are been hidden away from normal, what we call Western civilization or other civilizations, and don't know about Christianity or anything, but still they worship something above and beyond themselves. They want to worship, and that's the point I want to bring out here about that. All right, I'm just making sure everything's working fine. Yep, everything's working great, just great, man, just great. I have a video I want to share with you before I get into everything that's going on today, because it has to do with a lot of things I talked last week, and it's about free speech. And it's from the Institution on Constitutional Studies. and it's talking about does the First Amendment really protect hate speech? And this is something that I've talked about a lot. A lot of my anti-freedom progressive friends out there do not believe that free speech or the First Amendment protects a person's ability or right to say hateful things. And you get into a very subjective area here in life in general when you start going down this path, that, what is hate speech? Because that's a very subjective term, and depending on, who you are, it may be hate to you, but it's not hateful to me. And again, I want to invoke the sticks and stones theorem. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. They just won't. So let me get this up here. And I do use, for those of you broadcast, I still put up the fair use copyright disclaimer. Although, even if you do that, there are times where the folks that actually own the copyright to something, even though you're commenting on it, they will not allow you to use that. And I found in my past that a lot of this has to do with the person's politics. But I still put that up there. I still put that up there so people know that I'm not trying to steal their work. And if I get dinged on it and don't get monetized in my video, and I'll fight it. But if I still get dinged on it, I don't fight it a second time, because then if you do that, they hit your channel, and I just don't want that. And if the copyright person who owns copyright doesn't want me to allow me to use it, okay, as far as monetizing my videos. So I always put this up here. So let me get this set up, and we'll run this video real quick here.
In this day and age, many believe that hate speech must be controlled or censored by someone or some group. Unfortunately, due to the ignorance of so many in our country, terms like control and regulate ipso facto refer to government control and government regulation. Perhaps you are a constitutionally minded individual who believes, like founding father Benjamin Franklin, that freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. No matter what type of political, social, or religious views you may have, it is imperative you understand the government does not grant you free speech. Our founders understood this, and that is why we the people have delegated the authority to protect free speech to the government. This protection is found in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects the freedom of speech from infringement by the government. The drafters of the First Amendment carefully referred to it as the freedom of speech. This presupposed that free speech had a pre-political existence, an existence that God created. Hence, it pre-existed the government that was prohibited from infringing upon it. Eugene Volokh of the Washington Post wrote, "There are no hate speech exceptions to the First Amendment. Hateful ideas, whatever exactly that might mean, are just as protected under the First Amendment as other ideas. One is as free to condemn Islam or Muslims or Jews or blacks or whites or illegal aliens or native-born citizens as one is to condemn capitalism or socialism or Democrats or Republicans. This is the final question to be asked. Is it permissible to say whatever I want without fear of ramifications? No. For example, someone may return your fire with speech that may be offensive or hurtful to your feelings, and they have every right to do it. To put a finer point on it, there are kinds of speech that are unprotected by the First Amendment. Examples of these include speech presenting clear and present danger to national security or public safety, speech soliciting crime or violence, or fighting words. But those narrow exceptions have nothing to do with hate speech. Indeed, threatening to kill someone because he's black or white, or intentionally inciting someone to a likely and immediate attack on someone because he's Muslim or Christian or Jewish can be made a crime. But this isn't because it's hate speech. It's because it is illegal to make true threats and incite imminent crimes against anyone for any reason. Why? because they imperil what God has determined to give to the individual specifically being targeted, which is the protection of their individual life, liberty, and or property. Because government is God's minister for our good, it must fulfill its one and only purpose to secure our God-given rights. You see, speech is not force. It is merely opinion that needs no physical defense. When speech transcends the bounds of opinion into physical instigation, that is the point where the individual leaves off freedom and government has a duty to protect the God-given right of the individual being threatened. This is Jake McCauley with the Institute on the Constitution, bringing you the American View.
All right, folks, I just wanted to share that with you because I thought that was important. And Mr. McCauley there, he lays out a good argument for this, and he lays out what I thought was an exceptionally good argument about these being our God-given rights, and then government is instituted by God to protect these rights. And these hate speech laws that are coming out today are just horrendous because, again, they're very, very subjective. Oh, what you said hurt my feelings. You know, it's like, okay, but that's not hate speech. You know, please explain to me how that is hate speech. And again, it's an arbitrary thing. It's a subjective thing with hate speech. And the reason why I played that, I'm going to get back into Harvey, you know, Hurricane Harvey and some other stuff, some things I found out about the flood insurance that whether you know it or not may blow your mind, because it did mine. It is ridiculous when we get there. However, there is I have an article here from the Daily Caller. California, using wrong gender pronouns is illegal, or could be illegal. That's by Anders Hagstrom. Hog or Hagstrom. Hagstrom, that's what it is. Hagstrom, H-A-G, Hagstrom. Over to the Daily Caller, and he posted this on August 25th of this year. A bill that passed the California State Senate is now moving through the Assembly, could threaten jail time for anyone who refuses to use a transgender person's preferred pronoun. The law is currently limited in its effects to nursing homes and intermediate care facilities, but if passed, those who willfully and repeatedly refuse to use a transgender resident's preferred name or pronouns could be slapped with a $1,000 fine and up to a year in prison, according to the California Health and Safety Code. The state Senate bill, passed, and it was, and there's a link to the bill in the articles. Of course, all the articles I use, for the most part, have fantastic references, and they really do a good job of linking their things in here. It passed 26-12 at the end of May. Since then, the Assembly Judiciary Committee recommended the bill unanimously, and the General Assembly held its first hearing on the legislation this past Wednesday. How can you believe in free speech but think the government can compel people to use certain pronouns when talking to others? Greg Burt of the California Family Council testified in July. This is not tolerance. This is not love. This is not mutual respect. True tolerance tolerates people with different views. We need to treat each other with respect, but respect is a two-way street. It is not respectful to threaten people with punishment for having sincerely held beliefs that differ from your own. And it's titled the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Long-Term Care Facility Residents Bill of Rights. So now it's a right. They want to make it a right that you're called by your proper pronoun or your proper name, you know, and this again is one of these slippery slopes that we keep going down. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret here. I don't like me being called a dirty, bow-legged sheep herder by anybody. Okay? But if you have that opinion of me, what am I going to do? I can't scrub your brain out. And for me to run to the government, oh, you called me a sheep herder. Oh, terrible. And that's not a slight against the sheep herders of America or around the world, folks. I'm just saying. Or he called me bow-legged. You know, how dare that person call me bow-legged? And again, they have, in my opinion, they have every right to say that and more. I've been called some very vile names in my lifetime. Again, I go back to the sticks and stone theorem. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. So what? So what they called you something other than what you want to be called? Does that take away from your humanity? Or are you forcing your preferences on somebody else? Again, I'm with these folks here. Greg Burt there at the California Family Council. I'm with him. You know, God made male and female. A he and a she. A him and a her. That's it. What you think you are is really unimportant. It's important to you, but honestly, you know, as far as like your sexuality, your gender, what you think you are, I'd like to help you get some mental help, because that is a mental condition that you have. But in the grand scheme of things, folks, come on. You know, if someone calls me other than the gender I am, I said it's not going to bother me much. Now, if you want to get physical and keep calling me a sissy or something like that, and you keep going with that, and you take it beyond just name calling and try to push me around, I might show you how much of a sissy I really am. But other than that, like I said, it's just sticks and stones, folks, sticks and stones. So I just wanted to share that with you. I thought that came up today on my radar, and this is something California has gone so far off the rails out there that it's unreal. The government, even when, and I got an article here, we're going to talk about this a little bit, even when the government passes a bill that says an agency that's under their auspices, whether it's constitutional or not, that's a different story, or that's another issue on the side here. Whenever they pass a law to make an agency more profitable, let's say, and then when their constituents start calling in and they start running for cover and hooking up the taxpayers with a bill that's just ridiculous, we have a political ideology in this country that you have people that, and honestly, I don't know how most politicians, I'm not going to say all, I don't know how most politicians stand erect when they're giving speeches or sit up straight in their chairs when they're listening to speeches, because there's a lot of politicians in D.C. that are spineless, even spineless in face of their own constituents. Because all they care about, they don't care right or wrong. Doesn't matter about what's right or wrong, good or evil, anything like that. All they care about is staying in power and the next election. Oh, if I tick off my constituents, even though the constituents are wrong, and I just don't want to take the time to instruct them to go to town halls and say, hey, this is why I think you're wrong. Let's talk about this. Let's have some civil public discourse over these issues. Again, it amazes me how these politicians can sit up in their chairs or stand up without a spine. It really does. And every day on this show, I stand up to opposition that would see me silenced, that would see me not be able to exercise my freedom of speech, that have openly said, not directly to me, but because of my ideology, my freedom theories. And it's not even a theory, folks. It's practical. Freedom and liberty have been in practice, and every time they're put into practice, they work. I have another article we're going to get here about the free markets and price gouging. And a lot of people are just beside themselves. How dare they price gouge? And so we're going to talk about that also. But before we get on any further here, the short Bible lesson today is, are we saved by faith alone? Yes or no? And this is by Jack Wilkie over at focuspress.org. And this was posted back on September 3rd, 2015. And this is a question that keeps coming up time and time again. What does the scripture say about salvation? Is it faith only? Yes or no? And that's something you need the scriptures to answer for you. I don't need to answer it with my opinion, I need to go to the scriptures and find out what God's word says about it. And if people would just honestly sit down and read the scriptures without coming to the scriptures with preconceived notions or conclusions trying to prove what they believe, instead of going to the scriptures and finding out what God wants you to believe, I think a lot of people, in my opinion anyway, would be better off if they did that, because there's too many people out there. This faith only thing is like the easy way out. And if you go to Focus Press, there's actually, if you have them bookmarked on Facebook, there was a video out talking about this also. He gave 5 reasons against faith only, but it's a good article to go read. So, all right. Like I said, I entitled the show today, Putting Americans in Harm's Way. And it's not about military. I'm frustrated. I used to be in the National Guard. And it always frustrated me, and we never, while I was in the National Guard, we didn't get called up for natural disaster other than the blizzard of '93, and we really weren't called up. They were just the full-timers at the unit we were in. They were taking the Humvees and taking state police around, helping ambulances, getting folks out that really needed to get out, and so it wasn't that bad. So they didn't call up the governor did not call up the state militia, the National Guard. And a side note, I got in an interesting discussion over the weekend with a gentleman that told me that I was wrong about the state governors controlling the National Guard and who could actually call up the National Guard. And if you go back to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 8, it talks about who can call up the National Guard on the national level, the militia on the national level, and only Congress can do that. And then he pointed out some law later on in the early 1900s that sort of transferred the militia over to the National Guard and allowed the President of the United States to call them up. And I said, well, that's unconstitutional because it's an end run around the Constitution. And so there's a lot of things going to happen, and I just wanted to give you that little piece there about an end run around the Constitution, because this is going to be the story for months and months and months on end about the federal or the National Flood Insurance Program that's administered by Congress and by the agency. FEMA, I think, is the controlling agency over this. And so you're going to hear a lot of stories about this. And again, I would like to know what the constitutional controlling authority for Congress to even have set up this agency to begin with. Okay. And, we've seen in natural disasters like Sandy Hook and Katrina how ineffective they were, how millions of dollars were wasted. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of stories about waste and theft that are going to come out of Hurricane Harvey because of FEMA. And it's just honestly, folks, there's a lot of things that could have happened that would have averted this. And I know right now, I was watching news this morning, the waters have receded enough that they can go into some neighborhoods they haven't gone into to check on. They're going to do a house-to-house search and see if there's anybody left in some of the houses to see what's going on. They're just doing this house-to-house search. So there's still some folks that might be in imminent danger. And I don't mean to belittle their situation or take away from their situation, but I think the sooner we talk about these things on a national level, the better off we're going to be as a country. And the question I have, and there's an article here, let me pop this bad boy up here. Why wasn't Houston evacuated before Hurricane Harvey? And this is by Jessica McBride. And we see this a lot with natural disasters in the country. That it's one thing for your property to get destroyed and you come back and rebuild your property, but it's another thing to actually hunker down in place like in a hurricane. Now, I was in the military. We were under orders to stay in place, okay? And there was a general evacuation. It wasn't a mandatory, but it was a suggested evacuation in Charleston, South Carolina when Hurricane David came through. But it was the reason why it was a suggested, not mandatory, because I think it was a Category 1 or 2 hurricane. It wasn't one of these Category 4s that came blowing through. At least that's my recollection. I can look it up and see what the category of the hurricane was. However, this was a Cat 4 Category 4 hurricane before it made landfall, and there was a lot of predictions of a lot of rain coming down with this. You got the storm surge that comes along with your hurricanes that prevent the water from draining back out into the ocean. You have homes that are built over swamps, and they got pavement going up to the homes. And so the swamps weren't able to absorb any water at all, or very little water, and most of it went down the streets and was collecting in the lowest parts of Houston and outlying areas around Houston. And so as a Cat 4, why wasn't Houston evacuated before Hurricane Harvey? This is by Jessica McBride over at Heavy.com, and she posted this on the 28th, which would have been Monday. She says, why hasn't Houston evacuated? Why wasn't there a mandatory evacuation order for the city before the flooding started from Hurricane Harvey? Who made the call? Those are questions people are asking as horrific images circulate of the dire flooding in the city. People begged for help from rooftops. A man was rescued from a partially submerged semi-truck, and families pleaded for rescue on social media. Relatives tell KHOU TV that 6 family members, 4 of them age 16 or under, have now died in the flood while trying to cross a Houston bridge. A man's living room was so flooded he caught a large fish in it. And in nearby Dickerson, seniors were photographed sitting up to their waists in water in a nursing home. You can read more of these accounts, and they put a link up there in the article. The frantic calls for help continued August 28th, even as civilians took to boats to assist official rescuers. For example, Houston resident Lydie Shaw told CNN that her home is underwater and 11 people, including children, are trapped inside, saying it's just hard to get help here. Nobody's here to help. As a result of all the devastation, city and county officials are facing questions about why the evacuation order was never given. And it wasn't. All the news I've heard, folks, an evacuation order never went out. It never did. Just stay off the roads. I think that's the best thing. Stock up on some food and games if you have kids, and stay at home, the Houston mayor told residents on August 25th. But based on history and expert opinions, some argue the evacuation might not have helped and could have made things worse, as occurred during Hurricane Rita. City officials, though, urged residents to ignore social media posts predicting a more dire situation before the hurricane hit. Some think more provisions should have at least been made for the city's most vulnerable residents before the flooding, or to get those in flood-prone areas out. And I do agree with that. Furthermore, Houston residents were given mixed messages before the storm struck. The Republican governor suggested evacuation, but the Democrat mayor and the Republican judge overseeing the city's emergency operations suggested otherwise and didn't order it, urging people to stay put instead. The decision was complicated, others say, by past evacuations that caused problems of their own by the sheer population size of the city. However, it was no surprise that Houston might flood. CNN noted that Houston is known for its susceptibility for flooding because of its flatness. And because, like I talked on the show yesterday about the no zoning laws and these subdivisions would be built on bayous and wetlands, and those wetlands help to soak up some of the water. They would have never soaked up all the water they needed to, but it might have made it a little bit less. And again, this is my opinion. Why do folks need to be told to evacuate? Hurricane Rita. I've been down there when they had significant rainfalls down there. You know, it wasn't even a hurricane come on, and it quickly flooded the streets and everything because of the storm surge the storm brought with it. Not to the point that it is now, but there was areas where, in the industrial areas where I had to pick up and deliver loads, that I had to go way out of my way to get to a warehouse because of the flooding and stuff. And again, you have a Cat 4 hurricane bearing right down on you, folks. Why do you need to be told to evacuate? Save as much stuff as you can, get it as high as you can, pack up the family, and head out. Even if it's a day or two ahead of time, head out. And, well, where are we going to go? Anywhere but there. Preferably north or northwest. Get out. That's what I don't understand. Why do you have to wait for an evacuation order? Oh. And then the thing is, folks, and this is what gets my dander up about this whole situation. Because an evacuation order, mandatory evacuation order wasn't put out, folks didn't feel the need to evacuate. Oh, it's not going to be as bad as it, as everybody says it is. It almost reminds me of the false prophets of old in the Old Testament before the Babylonian captivity. Oh, God's not going to abandon us. Everything's going to be okay. God's going to take care of us. And the people never changed. And again, time and time again, you have these storms coming through. People do the same thing. Just going to hunker down in place, especially in a place like Houston or Louisiana or New Orleans, that is prone to flooding when they have significant rain events. And this was a catastrophic rain event. 50 inches of rain, folks. 50 inches. Can you believe that? I've never seen that much rain at one time. And again, folks, Americans are putting other Americans in harm's way. If these people would have had the good sense to evacuate themselves ahead of time, first off, the highways wouldn't have been near as crowded. If they waited till this hurricane hit and started raining and started to evacuate, what sense does that make? They had fair warning. We knew about Hurricane Harvey days before that was coming up through there and how they thought it was going to strengthen. And even if it didn't strengthen to a Cat 4 and you got out of town for a couple days just in case, no harm, no foul. You were out of the way. You weren't on the highway. You got out of the way. And honestly, I don't know too many people that don't know other folks down in Texas anyway. It seems like everybody knows somebody somewhere. and if it was coming up like that, honestly, there's a lot of churches, there's a lot of good folks in Texas that would probably take a lot of people in if they needed to during a situation like this. But getting back to my point, these are Americans that decided to hunker down in place. Now they get trapped. And it's not a safe situation for the rescuers either, And now they're putting other Americans in harm's way because they didn't use their good senses to get out of harm's way themselves. You see what I'm saying? And I know, like I said, maybe this is too early to be critical of this, but I don't like the thought of first responders and rescue workers putting themselves in harm's way when it is not necessary. When it's absolutely not necessary. This could have been a lot of this, not all of it, because you're still going to have some diehards out there. Oh, I'm not going to get out of my house. And then they're the ones that are sitting up on the roof thinking, well, maybe I should have got out of my house. And not that I want anybody to die, but maybe they need to sit on that roof and contemplate life for a few minutes before they get rescued. Again, the evacuation order wasn't given. The governor said it should have been. The mayor, Democrat mayor, Republican judge that was in charge of all this, oh no, it's not going to be that bad. Honestly, folks, those two guys need to be removed from office. In my opinion, they need to go. If they're that dumb, a Category 4 hurricane is nothing to mess with, folks. It just isn't. Matter of fact, no hurricane's anything to mess with, but especially a Category 4. And it amazes me the lengths of stupidity with politicians. And if you do the mandatory evacuations, and I've read other articles and watched some news items about this, if you've done the mandatory evacuations in an orderly fashion from the ones that are in the flood zone, that are actually built on bayous, or they're in low-lying or right at sea level, if those are the ones that are mandatory first, that you need to get out of here first and get those going and get them up the highway and get them out of there. And then as the hurricane came down, if it looked like it was going to be even more powerful when it hit land, then you go out to the next zone. You zone everything out. and then these people, and of course there's going to be people in these other zones that are saying, you know what, if they're mandatory evacuating these folks, maybe I need to get my hiney up the road. And trust me when I tell you, the highways in Texas, especially around Houston, aren't the main, U.S. highways are not, or the interstate highways, excuse me, are not the only way out of Houston. Texas has one of the best road systems I've seen. County roads, U.S. roads, interstates, the whole nine yards. But everybody likes to get on the highway because they're going to get out of there faster, and that's just not necessarily the case. Now, I don't want to beat this dog to death here, but you understand my point here. You understand my point. These folks are putting other Americans in harm's way because they want to be stubborn or they want to be ignorant and just stay put. And that's, folks, and I was told I'm lucky by some folks because I chose not to live in a flood zone. I'm like, I'm not lucky. I just chose not to live in a flood zone. There's no luck involved. There's a little common sense on my part. As I grew up around Findlay, Ohio, we lived out in Mount Blanchard, Ohio, and I dealt with enough floods in my young life. I didn't want to have to deal with them in my adult life, especially my living circumstances. So I don't. I just choose not to. And if you choose to live in a flood zone, have the common courtesy when a major flood event may be coming your way to take some steps to evacuate. You go to a friend's house, my brother and sister-in-law that live in Sunbury. If the floodwater is about ready to come over the flood wall, we told them to come out here. We got plenty of room for them out here. And like I said, everybody knows somebody that's not in a flood zone that they could hunker down, even if it's in their garage. They could hunker down in the garage until everything's over and go back home. I'm just saying, folks. Like I said, I know there's going to be some people out there that's going to take me to task for that and going to be mad. How dare he? They're still rescuing people, and he's talking about the ignorance of some people not evacuating, or the government not mandating the evacuation. And it won't change. After Harvey's all cleaned up and it's years, down the road, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, and they get another hurricane event in there, it won't change. The mayor of Houston and whoever the judges in charge of the evacuation, emergency services and stuff like that, they're going to say the same thing then as they do now. Well, create more of a problem. How much more of a problem will we create getting the people out of town than having to go through and rescue them by boat? Honestly, I fear for lack of common sense in the country, folks. I really do. And especially as someone who's a steward of the people, that are elected to govern over the people, not to take that type of action because part of their job is to protect the people? How does that make sense? How does that make sense at all? All right, I have this, and this is another one that I agree with John Stossel on this. The reasoning is sound. The news is all over the news now about price gouging down there. Okay, about stores having supplies and running out of supplies and charging more money for them. And there's a lot of Walmart. I was on there looking at some stuff this morning at Walmart. Actually, I'm looking for a leaf blower I can plug in. We're cleaning out our basement and I need something to blow the cobwebs out and do some other cleanup around the house, and that'd be just easier to have a leaf blower. And when I went on the page, they're talking about making a donation. Walmart is going to donate, for every dollar you donate, they'll donate $2 up to $10 million. That's a lot of money. And they're shipping this stuff down. There's a lot of stuff. Anheuser-Busch is shipping water down there. The Church of Christ Disaster Relief is, they're in full swing sending stuff down to that area and stuff like that. And what they do usually is they stage at a local Church of Christ and administer things from there. But there's still things going to happen. Right now, the country's largest oil refinery is shut down because of the flooding, and that they ceased operations, shut everything down so there's no problems. When all the water's receded, then they go back into the refinery. And I was reading up about this. They go back in the refinery and they have their on-site inspectors that inspect everything to make sure there's nothing wrong. And then they gear the plant back up and keep checking everything until they're back to full capacity again, and that's going to affect our prices. I talked about this yesterday. We're going to go into town later on this afternoon, and you know what? I was in town this morning and didn't really look at the gas prices. I was afraid to, I think. I was also half asleep. I had to get some milk because I was in town yesterday and didn't have my wallet. But the gas prices are going up, and they're going to go up, and I think they're going to hit more than $3 a gallon here, not the too near future, because of what's happening down there. Now, this is an article by John Stossel posted over at townhall.com, and he posted this yesterday. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is upset about price gouging during Hurricane Harvey. Some stores raised prices to $99 for a case of bottled water, $5 for a gallon of gas. These are the things you can't do in Texas. He says there's a significant penalties if you price gouge in a crisis like this. There sure are. $20,000 per gouge, $200,000 fine if the victim is a senior citizen. Texas, a state that I thought understood capitalism, punishes people who practice it. Prices should raise during emergencies. Price changes save lives. That's because prices aren't just money, they are information. Price changes tell suppliers that their customers want most, maybe chainsaws more than blankets, water more than flashlights. Quit your witch hunt, economist Don Bordeaux wrote Paxton. Government intervention is often justified as a means of correcting market failures, but by enforcing prohibitions on price gouging, your office causes market failures. Boudreaux was right. Suppose a disaster devastates your town and your local store is not allowed to raise the price of bottled water. People rush to buy all the water they can get. The store sells out. Only the first customers get what they need. The store owner has no incentive to risk life and limb restocking his store. He wants to get to safety too, so he closes the store. But if the store owner can charge $99 for a case of water, you will buy less water and other customers get what they need. More importantly, entrepreneurs have an incentive to move heaven and earth to bring water to the disaster area. They soon do, and prices drop again. That's economics, supply and demand. It works pretty well. Politicians often try to outlaw that. When Uber appeared and used surge pricing during busy times, my dumb mayor tried to ban Uber. The ban didn't stick. Fortunately, seeing people pay higher prices inspires more Uber drivers to leave home to offer people rides, and it causes customers to try other alternatives at busy times. When prices float, there are no shortages. Since Texas Attorney General didn't seem to understand that, Boudreaux tries to educate him. By forcibly keeping legal prices lower than their actual market values, you not only encourage black markets, you obstruct the information and incentives that are necessary both to encourage consumers to use those goods more sparingly and to encourage suppliers from around the world to rush to the devastated areas. People will denounce capitalist greed after the next disaster too, but there's nothing kind about pretending that bottled water and other valuable goods will be available as sellers are forbidden to raise prices that supplies are short. I think reporters on CNBC Business, a business-oriented network, would understand economics, but they're as clueless as Texas Attorney General. Not only did CNBC parrot his comments about gouging, they then claim devastating storm may actually boost U.S. GDP. And we talked about this yesterday. It doesn't. It's a supply shock to the whole system. And money is lost all over the place. Case in point, the refinery shut down. I'm not pumping gas. Guess what? It's going to cost me more dollars to do the same things I normally do. So that's taking money out of my pocket that I might spend in another sector of the economy. So no, it doesn't help GDP because I have to spend more on gas. Maybe I won't spend any more, or I can't spend any more over here. So all I'm doing is spending more money on gas. How is that helping the GDP? Because these other folks that sell the stuff aren't selling it now. So that takes away from the gross domestic product. Again, it just amazes me how a guy like me that's only got a high school education and I'm a rogue scholar can understand this concept, but you have economists out there have PhDs and masters and all these kind of things, and they don't understand the simple thing. Again, he's just putting the $99 for a case of water there arbitrarily. Whether it goes up or not isn't the point. The point is, if the prices are allowed to go up, it's not price gouging, it's signaling the market. And if you go into the store thinking, boy, we're going to be out of water soon, I got to stock up on as much water as I can. You come out of there, let's say you got a family of 4, and you come out of there with 20 cases of water at, $8 a case, or even let's say $10 a case, just to keep you spent $80 on 10 cases of water, and you get home, boy, you got yours, but then the store soon runs out, and there's not enough to go around, and there never really is. Scarcity is part of economics. But if the store owner is allowed to raise the price, 2 things happen. One, does he make a profit? Yes, but he has the extra money to maybe expedite the products back into his store. And also, at a higher price point, you may decide, well, we do need water, but I'm not paying, $90 a case for water. I'll buy 1 case and we'll use it sparingly, and hopefully we'll get some relief in here before we run out of that, or maybe even 2 cases. It doesn't matter. And that gives other people the chance to buy some too. And again, it signals the market. It's simple economics. And this one here, I thought this next one was funny on here. Paul Krugman made the same foolish error after 9/11 terrorism. He wrote that the attack might do some economic good. Now, Paul Krugman is a Nobel laureate. He's also a Keynesian economist, where Keynesian economics has been debunked for years and years and years, yet the government still holds on to it because it's an economics of control. And that's why the government likes it. But you got this Nobel laureate that's saying the same dumb things. And again, it makes me laugh that these folks don't get this. It does. So price gouging, it's not bad. It's really not price gouging. It's the free market acting the way the free market's supposed to act with supply and demand. It's always done this. It always will do that. Now, getting to the point about the black market, maybe I'll come in with a pickup truck and get 100 cases at $10 a case. Then I turn around and I sort of hoard that until people really need the water, and then I come back and say, hey, I got this water here, but it's going to cost you $100 a case for this water. Again, it opens up a black market, and there's going to be people out there willing to pay that price for that product. And you see how the black markets actually open up during a crisis like this. And it never fails. The government thinks they know what's best, and they really don't. Hopefully people watching and listening to the show will look at the mayor and that judge in Houston and say, you know what? Dan might have a point here that the government officials may not be the best indicator of what's right or wrong or the best things to do. Everybody should be shaking their head, They should be doing that all along. All right, real quick here. There's a couple, let's see, I got 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 4 articles in here. I know I'm not going to have time to get to it. I got an article from the privatemarketflood.com, private market flood insurance. There's facts and questions about this. They go off the maps that the FEMA has for flood control areas, and the FEMA maps are grossly outdated. They really are. I have this one I want to get to begin with, and basically, real quick here, federal or the National Flood Insurance Program basically is a subsidy for flood insurance that allows folks to build in higher risk flood zones. Now, private flood insurance that I was reading about in this one article, the Private Market Flood, you can see that over at danclementshow.com right after the show. They were talking about private insurance companies. When you have one of these flood instances like this, and you're still living in that flood zone, they drop your insurance. That's why you have to go to the National Flood Insurance Program to get an insurance, and they sell the insurance policies and also subsidies. Now, in a free market situation without the government interfering in that, people would not, first off, they wouldn't build the flood zones to begin with, and if they did, the market would signal that either if they're going to get flood insurance, it's going to cost them so much it doesn't make sense to build back in that area again, and so they're just not. They're just not. There's a lot of beach houses that were destroyed in Hurricane Sandy and some other places that the folks just aren't going to rebuild again. They're going to get them away from the beach, back away from the storm surge, and maybe drive up to the beach. Make common sense things like that. I do want to get to this one real quick here. Hurricane Harvey shows flood insurance needs reform. This is by Craig E. Colton from Fortune.com. Did I highlight? No, that's not the one I wanted to get to. Hang on a second. That's a good one in there talking about the flood insurance. Flood insurance, which seeks to enable families to rebuild houses and resume their lives, does not remedy the personal cost or the larger civic expenditures in the immediate wake of tragic inundations. The extensive flooding in Houston, Beaumont, Texas, and southwest Louisiana have exposed many of the shortcomings of the nation's current flood insurance program, as have a series of recent floods across Louisiana in the past. So the flood insurance that's going on is not adequate because it's run by the government. And I'm going to get over here. This is the article I wanted. This is by taxpayers.net. It's Flood Insurance Reform, A Taxpayer's Perspective by Steve Ellis. Now, Steve Ellis is the Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, which that's a mouthful in and of itself, and we need more of this common sense in this country. This was posted on June 7, 2017, and he was at a congressional hearing talking about the what they call the National Flood Insurance Plan, NFIP. But what really caught me when I was reading down through here, he talks about the background of the National Flood Insurance. It's a good read to go in there and get some history on that. Basically, it is important to understand the context of how the nation got into flood insurance business. After years of ad hoc disaster aid being meted out by Congress, the National Flood Insurance Program was established in 1968 to create a reasonable method of sharing the risk of flood losses through the program of flood insurance, which can complement and encourage preventative and protective measures. Now, this is the government bureaucracy talking about this, folks. Again, they have no fiduciary incentive to get these things right. But what I wanted to get to down in this, they go through some of this, the history of this. 1968 is when it's created. Again, one of these unconstitutional programs that's a redistribution of wealth to spread the risk of flooding. Now, I chose not to live in a flood zone. And I have house insurance. I have my fire insurance a little bit less because I have ponds right next door where they can suck water out of the ponds to help put my fire out. And I get like a 15% discount on my fire insurance. But why? Because I chose to live outside of a flood zone, why should I help subsidize through my tax dollars people who choose to live in these high-risk areas? Again, this is what happens with these federal programs. But this federal program, the NFIP, this is in June of this year, $25 billion in debt. Okay? $25 billion in debt. And what happens, or what happened with this, let me get this other article up here, federal flood insurance. Let me see if this is the other article I want to get. This is by NPR. Okay, so the Taxpayers for Common Sense, Steve Ellis was in front of Congress saying they're $25 billion in debt. So where are they getting all this money? Well, they have to prop it up with taxpayer money. This article by NPR from Christopher Joyce, Federal Flood Insurance Program Drowning in Debt. Now, this is back in 2014. So it really hasn't changed. It was in debt in 2014. It's in debt now. In 2014, they said there were $24 billion in debt. And this was the FEMA, the FEMA director at the time, Craig Fugate, said there were $24 billion in debt. And the reason why, because of the string of hurricanes and floods over the past decade had drained FEMA's insurance fund. Meanwhile, People keep rebuilding in flood zones in part because FEMA offers cut rate prices on 1/5 of its policies. So it's cheap to rebuild in these zones. And also the weird thing in this case is that Farragut was trying to convince Congress not to undo what it had just done. A 2012 law Congress passed, the Bigot Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act, instructed FEMA to charge some realistic insurance rates that are in keeping with the rates private companies would charge. Congress said, in effect, it's okay to stop subsidizing those policies. Well, that's when the roof came down. That's when the sky fell, because then the constituents started calling in because they were phasing in these higher premiums and stuff. And this is the funny part here. Right away, the phones in Congress started ringing so much that Congress called Fugate in to demand to stop the very law it just had passed. Among the most outraged was Maxine Waters, the co-sponsor of the Bigot Waters Act. These politicians don't have a clue to what they're doing in these areas like this. That's why the Founding Fathers restricted them with enumerated powers. And these are the only powers that the federal government should have. Everything else belongs to the state or the citizens, the people of the United States, respectively. The 9th, 10th Amendment. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going a little bit quick here. But I thought it was funny that Maxine Waters was one of these co-sponsors. And honestly, if you ever heard the woman speak, it's a wonder she became a congressperson, to be quite honest with you folks, and I'm being kind and gentle here. But what really made me laugh about this real quick, that Waters and other members are calling for a lengthy affordability study. Affordability study. Folks, it's called the free market. If they would get out of the way, quit doing things unconstitutionally, the free market would take care of this, and they would know what to charge these policies, and they wouldn't be floating this money on the back of other policy holders. They would charge, if you're going to build in the zone, we'll let you build in the zone, but this is how much it's going to cost you. Do you really want to build in the zone if your insurance costs almost as much as your house does? That's what the free market does. It takes care of stuff like this. You don't have to do an affordability study. Oh. Again, I just have to laugh about this. Since when was the government ever concerned about affordability? I've been dealing with the government since the Navy. I was in supply in my division in the Navy. I know the government's not concerned about affordability. They're just not. I was told many times by our Master Chief that we need to spend our budget so we can get at least the same amount or ask for more the next time, whether we needed to spend it or not. Many times. Many times. So, folks, that's the end of the show. Real quick show note here. I will not be in tomorrow for Free For All Friday because it's my anniversary, folks. I've been married to my beautiful bride for 33 years, so we're taking the day off. We're going to do some more stuff tomorrow. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your Constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. God bless and have a good day, and we'll see you on Monday, on Labor Day. We're going to have a show on Labor Day. We'll see you then, and have a blessed weekend, folks.